Hello, students. Let us resume our lecture on Anglo-Saxon elegiac poetry. So, I should discuss about these particular or these eight texts that have been treated as the examples of Anglo-Saxon elegiac poetry to be in a small detail. What happens, that from the English literature of the Anglo-Saxon period, we get some of the books that have fragments of these kinds of elegiac note, as you can see here. These are considered the specimen of the Anglo-Saxon elegy, and the first one is the Wanderer. As we can see from here, it is the Wanderer, and you will find that the Wanderer consists of 115 lines, right? And it is the most prominent elegy of the Anglo-Saxon literature, having all the qualities of being a perfect lyric. Okay, so in Wanderer, you will find that the features of lyric poetry are altogether present. That means the emotional effects and the feelings and some subjective orientations. Okay, some musical aspects. All these things are present in Wanderer. What happens now, that it is a lament of a solitary man, okay, who had once been happy in the service of a loved lord, right? And who is now, after long after his lord's death and the passing away of that earlier time of happiness and friendship, has become a wanderer. As you can find from the term, it is the wanderer. Okay, wander, wander. This wander means roaming or moving or something like that. So ultimately, he becomes a wanderer and journeying the path of exile, certainly, journeying the path of exile across the ICC. So that is the fundamental thing. As you can see that from the Anglo-Saxon period, you can find the Scandinavian references are there. So the pattern of life, the pattern of, you see, the geographical descriptions, okay, or the atmospheric descriptions, you will find that there is the iciness, or the icy representations, that the cool temperature, that means it is under, say, under 0 degree. Okay, so fundamentally the patterns of vegetations or the patterns of greenery that had to be began with an Anglo-Norman period. In the Anglo-Saxon period, you cannot find them to be present, because in the Anglo-Saxon period, the proper descriptions are associated with the horrific, gruesome detailings of the nature, and at the same time the people and the war and fighting and many other things, as you can find in Beowulf. So what happens, that after his lost death and the passing away of that earlier time of happiness and friendship, he has become a wanderer. That means the person, he begins his journey, the path of exile across the ICC, and you will find that the poem actually ends with uh, some moralizing spirit. Okay, the morality, as you can see in the ancient texts, in the typical, uh, say, classical texts, rather, you will find that there are some moralizing aspects have been introduced. But the main part of this particular elegy, we should say here, uh, is an impressive lament for departed joys. That is the fundamental thing that I should say here. There is the departed joys, done with a melancholic tone of reminiscence and effective use of, that is called, quote unquote, UB sant. That is called the UB sant motive. What is UB sant motive? It signifies, it actually, this particular term can, in modern English, it mean that where are the joys of the yesteryears? That means once there were joys, and now in the present scenario, we cannot find these joys to be present. So where are the joys of the yesteryear? So that particular temperament, that particular motive is recurring in these poems, and in Wanderer, that is actually being present. The next one is the Seafarer, as you can see from here. Uh, the seafarer, the term actually indicates that seafarer, that means a person who moves or roams around the seas. The seafarer seems to be a monologue, right, of an experienced sailor who has seen the perils of the sea. Here, obviously, we'll find that the seafarer is a metaphoric journey, and it actually signifies the journey of life. Rather, the sea represents the life. So what I'm trying to suggest here, that there are, you will find there are two persons. One is an experienced sailor, and the second one is a novice. That means an inexperienced sailor. So here you will find that the sailor has seen, that is, the experienced sailor has seen the perils of the sea and life and cannot deny its fascination. It has been regarded by some critics as a dialogue, okay, between an old sailor who speaks of the sufferings and a young sailor who agrees with him. So these can also be interpreted as not the two different personalities, as two different psyche or psychological states of human being in general. It is a dramatic lyric, obviously, as you can find it is in a conversant mode. So therefore you will find the dramatic nature is always present, of quite a high quality. It was two, or it had two central parts. The first part deals with the immense misery caused by uh, the topsy-turvy sea. The second part is an allegory in which the troubles of the seamen represent the pathetic scenario of their everyday life that I have already discussed. In spite of being witnessed a tremendous tragic life, the call of the sea to them seems to be the call which comes from the eternal home. That is, a call from God from which they cannot help. The famous lines from the Seafarer is, or these are, to taste the high streams, the salt waves in tumultuous play. Desire in my heart ever urges my spirit to wander. For that the Lord God shall bestow, be it honor or death. That is the actual temperament, Charaibeti. That is the temperament of adventure. We must move, the show must go on. The next poem is The Wife's Complaint. The wife's complaint depicts, as the term actually signifies, it is a complaint of a wife. The wife's complaint actually depicts a woman's heartrending lament for her exiled husband, from whom she has been separated and now is forced to dwell in the forest grove, surrounded by the high hill. She sits under the oak tree, lamenting over her wanton misfortune, and finally she puts the blame on her enemies and curses them. The poem is full of glorious images and speeches. Though somewhere of this book we find monotony, yet we cannot ignore uh, the emotion that is the main ingredient of a lament. Here we must utter the universal thesis. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. The line that recurs in To a Skylark by Shelley. So what happens, that whenever you will go with this particular text, that is the wife's complaint, you will find that there are ample provisions or ample references of difficult kinds of strifes and problems that the wife has actually faced. And at the same time, you will find that the wife is actually held the relatives responsible for their separation. But at the same time, if you go through the lines of the texts, ultimately, though these were written in the Old English language, so ultimately we cannot read them properly. But we can get ample references of the translations that have been made by the later scholars, and from that translations we can identify that though here in this particular poem the wife is complaining against the relatives for the separation of these two, because they are coming from two different castes, as we can see from the poem. But at the same time you even find that the complaint is also against the husband, right? Because the husband is also belonging to that particular culture where the family members were. And fundamentally, when we read the poem, we find that the wife's temperament and wife's words are to some extent a kind of a criticism of the society that was prevailing within this particular form. Caste system and ultimately the patriarchy and different kinds of orientations have been addressed in this particular poem. So that's why these poems are very important. Whenever you are going with the elegiac poetry, mind it that when you will read the heroic poetry that actually describes the battles and wars and fights, you will find that somehow these were eulogized, or these were a kind of, you will find some exaggerated descriptions. But in case of the elegiac poetry, you will find that certainly these are to be considered some manuscripts that can describe us something about the society, something about the societal aspects. So that's why these have to be dealt in detail. The next poem that you can see here, it is the Whitsit. Whitsit is very famous. Actually, if I have to describe all these poems in detail, then probably I can deal with them with proper judgment. But ultimately, the time constraints, and we cannot find them in here. So if situation demands, then ultimately I will go with these poems in detail. If the requests and queries come from the students in the comment box. Uh, the wheat seed, this is the fragmented text, as you see that it is 143 lines, and it is considered to be the earliest of the poems made by Anglo-Saxons in the continent. Right. It is also named after its opening word. Okay, the wheat seed, this name. It is included in the Exeter book, as you can find, if you go through the history of Anglo-Saxon period, then you will find there are different manuscripts are there: Beowulf manuscript, Junius manuscript, Exeter book, and Versailles manuscripts, and so it included in the Exeter book. And Whitsit is a wandering minstrel at Scrop. You can find the minstrels as Scops are the persons in whose words we can find the situations, we can find the story matters about the dynasties. Say, for example, if you move to any part of the country, suppose you were the Scop, you were the minstrel, and if you move to any particular part of a country and you have seen the treasures and maybe the prosperous situation of the country, and then you moved from that particular place to any another place, and then after certain years you are returning to that place and see you have seen that everything has gone. Why? Because another kind of an invader came and there was a kind of a battle, and everything was smashed or vanished. So what happens, that everything actually resides within your memory, and then whenever you create a kind of a song, okay, on the description of that particular country, then in that particular song these stories actually recur. So everywhere you will find that in these texts, or maybe in the Old English, or maybe in the Anglo-Norman periods, we can find there are ample references of the Scops and minstrels, okay, who actually tells of his wanderings, speaks about the feudal halls in which these are actually happening. So ultimately, in which you can find the basic references of King Hrothgar and others. The palace is being described, and other places have been mentioned. The King Hrothgar that you can find in Beowulf. So, who tells of his wandering, speaks of the feudal halls in which he sang, how men loved his song and gave him gifts, so that whatever he went, he found a ready welcome at the time. What the modern readers catch in this lyric is a glimpse of a poet's joy and grief, appealing humanity across the century. So that's why these four poems are very important. So there remains the other four. But today up to this, and then in our next lecture, I will resume the last four poems that have to be included in under the Anglo-Saxon elegiac poetry. So subscribe this channel and be with us, and ultimately we'll get the notifications regarding the future activities and the videos that are very important for your academic career. So today up to this, thank you then.